This beautiful girl had been a model, and that day she had to pose for a group of students to draw. Katerina had to wear a dress that was larger than her size and revealed her scar, making her feel extremely anxious. At that moment, the curtains were drawn back, and several men were waiting for her. The assistant, Tommaso, brought over a chair and told her to put her foot on it. Tommaso also touched Katerina's thigh, and she told him to take his hand off. Tommaso, somewhat annoyed, urged her to cooperate, so Katerina reluctantly complied, placing her hand on her forehead and striking a pose as if looking ahead. Then Tommaso came over to adjust her posture, and the disciples below started to sketch. At that time, teacher Andrea entered and told the disciples that they would be drawing the goddess of hunting, Diana. Teacher Andrea noticed that Katerina's leg had a smudge on it and ordered Tommaso to clean it for her. Tommaso immediately complied, spitting on a cloth and wiping it on Katerina, leaving her feeling helpless, realizing that Tommaso was getting back at her. The disciples began to draw, and teacher Andrea said they must include every detail from head to toe in their depiction of the perfect goddess. The best disciple this time would become his first disciple. Leonardo observed very carefully and noticed the wounds on Katerina's hand, then looked up to see the scar on her back. At that moment, teacher Andrea cracked the whip, and teacher Angela scolded one of the disciples, seizing their drawing and ordering them to start over. The atmosphere in the classroom was extremely tense. Katerina turned to look at Leonardo and saw him staring at her scar. After 2 hours, almost everyone finished drawing and left, going home to edit their work. Katerina noticed that Leonardo was not drawing her, but rather a monkey, which made her very unhappy and feel humiliated. Leonardo insisted that he meant no offense, explaining that teacher Andrea had told them to draw the perfect goddess, but the scars on her hand and back did not represent that perfection, so he couldn't draw her. The next day, on submission day, all the disciples lined up. Teacher Andrea checked each one. The first student presented their drawing, but teacher Andrea critiqued it for being too fat and therefore unacceptable. He moved on to the second student. The teacher asked if he was drawing his mother, as the drawing looked too old and wasn't up to standard. Teacher Andrea said that even the monkeys at the zoo could draw better than him, and the second apprentice was sent away. Leonardo felt extremely tense. At least others had drawn something, while he would be submitting a blank sheet. He didn't know what to do. The third disciple presented his drawing, and teacher Andrea evaluated it as overall decent, harmonious, easy on the eyes, and lively, but stated that without using the heart to draw, one could only capture the appearance. The teacher told the third apprentice to go back and think more. Now it was Leonardo's turn. Tommaso snatched away Leonardo's drawing, and teacher Andrea saw that the first sheet was blank. The second sheet was also blank. Angrily, he asked if Leonardo was joking with him, and if he dared to submit a blank sheet. He believed Leonardo was mocking him. Feeling ashamed, Leonardo explained that he couldn't feel it. Teacher Andrea furiously told him to sleep under the water pipe, as he might find some inspiration there. He then instructed Leonardo to submit a proper drawing the next day to make up for it, or else he should never come back again. At that point, Katerina arrived at the studio wanting to continue modeling, but she was informed that they no longer needed her. They had found a more obedient model who did not have any scars. Indeed, they had found a new model, exposing her chest for everyone to draw. Katerina had no choice but to leave. As she stepped outside, she encountered Leonardo. She accused him of mentioning the scar on her back to them, which had gotten her fired. Leonardo quickly apologized, explaining that he hadn't said anything. He offered to pay double the amount to draw her again. Seeing Leonardo's sincerity, Katerina agreed and took him to her place. He hesitated a little, thinking that it might not be appropriate for a man and a woman to stay together, but since he needed to submit a drawing, he reluctantly went in. After receiving the money, Katerina began to pose. Leonardo introduced himself and asked for her name. After Katerina introduced herself, Leonardo told her to sit on the chair, exposing just her shoulders. However, Leonardo wanted to create a colored painting, so at midnight he sneaked into the studio to steal some pigment from teacher Andrea. Just then, he encountered teacher Andrea. Leonardo approached and asked how he was doing. Teacher Andrea replied that he was facing a problem. It turned out he had taken on a difficult task, to place an 18-ton cross atop a church. Completing this task would bring him both money and fame, but when the teacher began calculating, he realized it was far from simple. The weight of the round body was too heavy, and the pulley could only lift part of it, unable to reach the roof. Moreover, the pulley system couldn't withstand such weight. It could collapse at any moment as it went higher. If that happened, teacher Andrea would lose his lifelong reputation. Teacher Andrea told Leonardo to go back to sleep, saying that if he couldn't even think of a solution, someone who submitted a blank sheet like Leonardo wouldn't be able to help either. Leonardo blew out a candle, watching the white smoke rise. At that moment, the smoke was weightless. If the body of the cross had been the same, it would have been much easier. Leonardo immediately came up with a solution. He sneaked into teacher Andrea's room and sketched his design on paper, adding 4 wheels on top, eliminating the need for the lower axle, add a rope on the left, and the angle needs to be adjusted. Leonardo worked hard all night, and the next day, when teacher Andrea saw the design, he was stunned. His hands trembled, the mouth mumbled in disbelief, questioning why he hadn't thought of it himself. Then, teacher Andrea prepared to implement the plan. Finally, on the day of placing the cross, the classes from high to low stood below. The 18-ton cross began to be be lifted. It turned out that 12 wheels had been set up above to reduce the pulling force, allowing just 2 people to lift it. The cross favorably ascended to 50 meters high, and the next step was to adjust its direction, which was the most challenging part. Teacher Andrea felt immense stress. He had bet his entire life on this. His disciple quickly pulled the lever, and the cross began to move, counting down the meters. Leonardo anxiously stood below, observing. The speed had to be quick. If delayed, the support wouldn't hold. The cross moved up above the church, just 3 meters away from reaching its place. Everyone below was tense. If it fell, it could be deadly. Finally, the cross neared the roof, and 3 people stood around it, using their shoulders to support it. The cross was successfully placed on the roof of the church, and everyone applauded, celebrating the achievement. Finally, it was a success. They had made history, and Teacher Andrea was recorded in the church's annals, but only he knew that this was not his achievement. Leonardo was of course very happy. Whatever, this was Aslo, his design. But trouble quickly arose. Later that evening, when Leonardo returned to the studio, Teacher Andrea discovered that he had stolen the pigment. He gave Leonardo a chance to explain, but Leonardo didn't mention the design. He only explained that he wanted to create the perfect painting. Teacher Andrea kicked Leonardo out, and the one who informed him was Tommaso. The next day, when Caterina heard about Leonardo being expelled, she was furious. She went to the studio to confront them, asking if they knew how talented Leonardo was, and she directly presented Leonardo's painting to Teacher Andrea. He held the painting in his hands, stunned. The painting resembled Caterina by 99%. The delicate and vivid brushwork surpassed his teacher's skill. He never expected that among his disciples there would be a genius. Teacher Andrea hurried outside to look for Leonardo, who was washing his face at the time. Seeing Teacher Andrea come looking for, he quickly grabbed a shirt to dry his face. Teacher Andrea asked if the plan for lifting the cross was drawn by him. Leonardo humbly admitted it was. Teacher Andrea nodded in satisfaction, telling him to follow him back. From that day on, Leonardo would be his disciple. Leonardo was overjoyed to follow his teacher back. Afterward, Teacher Andrea received a second assignment, to create a piece of art for the church. He wanted to paint the angels of Jesus and invited Leonardo to join him on the task. Before that, he would teach Leonardo some knowledge. The first lesson was about light. Teacher Andrea said to Leonardo that light is divided into 3 types. The first type is direct light, like sunlight or candlelight. The second type is diffused light. If you cover a candle with fabric, the light can flicker, creating a blend of light and shadow. This was the real challenge for a painter. For the third type of light, Teacher Andrea took Leonardo outside to observe. Throughout his life, he had always pursued how to capture the beauty before him eyes. The second lesson was about colors. Teacher Andrea mixed yellow and blue together, which became olive green. The third lesson was about realistic drawing. They went to the church, where Teacher Andrea nearly finished the painting, leaving the most difficult part for Leonardo. Looking at the angel in the painting, Leonardo hesitated for a long time, but stopped before placing his hand down to paint. He closed his eyes and imagined the appearance of the angel, but in his mind only Caterina appeared. Leonardo took a cloth and wiped the image of the angel clean, then painted the image he envisioned. He painted from morning until night, and then from night until the next morning, meticulously capturing every brushstroke. The painting was finally complete. Teacher Andrea had been standing behind him for some time, and it seemed that Leonardo had learned well. Teacher Andrea smiled proudly. On the day the painting was unveiled, Leonardo and Teacher Andrea attended a banquet. The guests applauded in celebration, and everyone loved the painting, especially the angel within it. Everyone admired it for its outstanding execution. Even Duke Ludovico of Milan praised Leonardo's talent and invited him to paint for double the pay with his own studio. However, Leonardo declined. He could not betray his teacher. Ludovico told Leonardo that once he declined, there would be no second chance, but he still stood by his decision. Seeing Leonardo being celebrated by everyone, Tommaso felt uncomfortable. He had once had the opportunity to become Teacher Andrea's disciple, but now that position had been taken from him. Previously, Tommaso had fabricated stories to have Teacher Andrea expel Leonardo, but little did he expect that Leonardo would not only return, but also receive such honor. Tommaso once again wanted to harm Leonardo. Leonardo was called back by a male model who wanted to exchange knowledge about painting. As the two arrived at the house, Tommaso handed a letter of accusation to the magistrate. Leonardo was arrested and imprisoned for misconduct. Caterina quickly arrived and handed him the drawing paper, which had written on it, "Don't be afraid." With the drawing paper, Leonardo felt much calmer. He began to draw for the people in prison. Fortunately, there was a relative of the job bank in the prison who greatly admired Leonardo's work and later rescued him out. However, Teacher Andrea wanted to expel Leonardo from the studio. He did not want his reputation to be affected. Although he valued Leonardo's talent, he believed that if Leonardo stayed, he would not receive any commissions. No matter how much Leonardo pleaded, Teacher Andrea could not jeopardize his career. In the end, he expelled Leonardo. Just when Leonardo was at a dead end, he received an invitation from the job bank to paint a portrait of Ginevra, the daughter of the bank owner, who was preparing to get married. The request was for the painting to be cheerful, but Ginevra's face was filled with sadness, which posed a challenge for Leonardo. Caterina advised him to think carefully. He had been expelled from the studio, and his reputation was ruined. It was a rare second opportunity, so why make things difficult for himself? Caterina encouraged Leonardo to follow their wishes. To thank Caterina for her help, Leonardo assisted her in finding a job. The next day, the two went to the employer's house, and Leonardo began his work. The task turned out to be more difficult than he had anticipated. Ginevra showed no signs of joy and could not muster a smile. No matter what Leonardo said, Ginevra remained indifferent. Days passed, and he still couldn't paint her face, only managing to work on the background. The following day, Leonardo finally saw Ginevra smile. It turned out that her best friend had arrived. He was Galeazzo, the strongest subordinate of Duke Ludovico. When Galeazzo saw Caterina for the first time, he was immediately captivated by her, and Ginevra joyfully rushed to greet him. Leonardo observed everything and realized that Galeazzo was the one Ginevra wanted to marry. A few days later, Leonardo also finished the painting. When Ginevra saw the artwork, she was so moved that she couldn't speak. Ultimately, Leonardo had followed his instincts and captured Ginevra's true appearance, portraying her sad expression and holding leaves that represented the Galeazzo family. Looking at this painting, Ginevra finally smiled. However, her family did not approve. They were furious, destroyed the painting, and refused to pay any compensation. With no job left, Leonardo had no choice but to beg his father for help. As an illegitimate child, he had been abandoned by his father at a young age and raised by his grandfather. Leonardo pleaded earnestly, and his father eventually agreed to open a gallery for him and find his first client. A pastor asked him to paint a piece at a 1:1 scale based on a sample painting, and Leonardo agreed to take the job. He called his former classmates for assistance and added some personal details to the painting. A few days later, the pastor came to check on the progress. Seeing the unfinished painting, he simply said it was the worst painting he had ever seen before, then turning around and walking away. Thus, this job was considered a failure. At that moment, Leonardo's father revealed his true colors, criticizing him as a mistake and useless. Leonardo could only stand there in silence. When he returned home, he saw Caterina packing her things. It turned out she had found a place to go. Galeazzo had fallen in love with her at first sight and wanted to take her to Milan. Leonardo tried to smile, wanting to reassure her as she left. He told her that his work was going very well and that he would be heading to Milan soon. Leonardo finished the remaining work alone. Tommaso came to him, admitting that everything was his fault, including getting Leonardo imprisoned. However, Leonardo had already figured it out. No one else could have done such a thing. Tommaso apologized and begged to be Leonardo's apprentice. The two of them headed to Milan. The soldiers there outnumbered the civilians, making it difficult for artists to thrive. However, Leonardo had an idea. He sketched his ideas for designing weapons for the Milan army. Although he had previously declined Ludovico's offer, this time he came as an engineer, presenting designs for a cannon. Yet Ludovico did not give him a chance to explain and simply returned the designs, stating that he did not need defensive equipment. Leonardo wanted to try once more, believing that what Ludovico lacked was a work of art. He insisted that he could design a masterpiece for Ludovico, begging for another opportunity, claiming the work would exceed everyone's imaginations. At that moment, guests from the ball arrived. Leonardo was not interested, but had to pretend to be excited. To his surprise, he ran into Caterina there, which was the happiest thing that had happened to him recently. After some thought, Ludovico allowed Leonardo to put on a play for the Duke's grandchild. Leonardo reluctantly agreed, but the plan did not go smoothly. The lead actor, Ronaldo, was uncooperative, believing that Leonardo's abilities were still insufficient. The words were filled with disdain. It was only after Ronaldo saw Leonardo's designs that he became interested. In the following days, Leonardo worked diligently on his painting, but producing the play turned out to be his first failure. He felt a bit anxious. Ronaldo realized that Leonardo was struggling, so he gave Leonardo the experience of flying in the air. Leonardo gradually adapted to this feeling, stretching out his arms to embrace the freedom. In that moment, he finally understood Ronaldo's words about needing to combine reality with imagination. At that moment, he imagined himself as a bird, spreading its wings to fly, and Leonardo suddenly felt a surge of inspiration. That day, he saw the steward, with a booted man, bearing a badge at his feet, sneaking around and scheming something. That night, someone stole Leonardo's pigment. Tommaso reported this to him, but Leonardo didn't pay much attention, as he was distracted by Ronaldo's meal. This moment would later become the foundation for one of Leonardo's masterpieces. Sometime later, Ludovico hosted a banquet. The steward sprinkled pigment on the dog, intending to assassinate Ludovico while framing Leonardo for the crime. Ludovico often petted the dog, believing it posed no danger. However, as he spoke, his head began to sweat and struggled to breathe. Leonardo noticed the blood on Ludovico's hands and immediately realized that he had been poisoned. Sure enough, Ludovico collapsed to the ground. Leonardo quickly ordered his attendants to bring the necessary antidotes, mixing them for Ludovico to drink, and then he called for a doctor to provide timely treatment. Leonardo waited outside while Caterina came up to ask about him. She told him that if they couldn't catch the culprit, Leonardo would have to bear all the responsibility. As she comforted him, Galeazzo happened to pass by and saw this scene. His woman was comforting another man. Galeazzo felt a surge of jealousy. After a night of treatment, Ludovico had recovered and just needed to rest a bit more. Galeazzo encountered Leonardo again and questioned Leonardo in front of Ludovico, asking how an artist could know what the antidote was. Leonardo explained that many of the pigments artists used contained deadly poisons, and he had studied their components, which allowed him to apply the antidote immediately. Ludovico thanked thanked him and stated that the play would go on as scheduled. Leonardo also noticed Galeazzo's suspicion toward him, so he told what he had seen. The steward had met a booted man with a lion badge. On the day of the play, Galeazzo told Caterina that she must not see Leonardo again, otherwise she would have to return to Florence. Caterina had no choice but to comply. The play went smoothly, with smoke effects and flying fake birds, prompting applause from the audience. The performance continued into the evening, under candlelight, featuring fire-breathing acts. In the final scene, Ronaldo appeared, and Leonardo recognized that the booted man with the lion badge was indeed Ronaldo. Just as Ronaldo was about to go on stage, Galeazzo killed him on the spot. Ronaldo died right there, but Ludovico remained composed. It turned out this had all been part of his plan. Ludovico addressed the audience, declaring this to be the fate of a traitor. He had uncovered the fact that Ronaldo and the steward wanted to assassinate him to seize power, and he used the play as an opportunity to demonstrate his authority. After the performance, Ludovico instructed Leonardo to design a statue in memory of his father. Leonardo called upon his former classmates for assistance, but this commission presented challenges. There were many great equestrian sculptures in the world, and creating a unique design was indeed difficult. Leonardo could only observe the horses from the front. He went to the riding arena to get a closer look at the horses, touching them and feeling their physical structure. Suddenly, the sky darkened, and a bolt of lightning struck, startling the horse and causing it to jump. This moment inspired Leonardo, and he hurried back to the studio to sketch the image of the horse. He also made a decision. Instead of sculpting with stone, he would use mud and wood, and finally used external cast copper to create a unique sculpture. Everyone got to work, using steel wires to secure the shape of the horse, and then covering it with clay to create realistic details. Leonardo touched the horse's body and observed the overall form, still feeling unsatisfied. He recalled the moment when the horse had jumped and neighed, wanting to express its grandeur. It needed to be depicted leaping, which would require adding extra weight to its hind legs. Leonardo decided to add an enemy beneath its front legs. This way, the weight issue could be addressed. Tommaso reminded Leonardo that they had been working for a long time, and with the deadline approaching that week, starting over might not be feasible. Leonardo ignored the reasoning and instructed everyone to work through the night. While Leonardo was busy, Caterina faced her own troubles. Galeazzo saw her sneakily meeting with Leonardo. That gaze can't deceive others. Galeazzo left, leaving Caterina alone without anyone to rely on. Fortunately, Ludovico's wife was fond of her and allowed her to stay. However, Duke Ludovico had taken an interest in Caterina's beauty. Ludovico's wife told Caterina that Ludovico would be having dinner with her that evening, just the two of them. Madame even gifted Caterina a gown, making Ludovico's intentions quite clear. The lady also felt powerless, believing that pleasing her husband was the only way to ensure her own stability. Caterina didn't know what to do, so she sought Leonardo's advice. But he wasn't in the mood to pay attention to this. At that moment, he was only focused on the statue, they arguing fiercely, and in the end, Caterina chose to compromise. Women were often treated poorly, and a single word from a man could ruin them instantly. What could they do? They could only sacrifice themselves. Leonardo focused all his energy on the sculpting work. He invited the model Marco to help. Marco, who loved painting, Leonardo then asked Marco to stay and help. With the efforts of the team, the sculpture was completed. Ludovico walked around, observing it closely, but was dissatisfied with the work. He expressed that he needed a great sculpture and questioned what Leonardo had created. Angrily, Ludovico left. Leonardo explained that this was just a model. This hunting statue would be 8 times bigger. Everyone was bewildered, as they hadn't been informed of this. Noticing Ludovico's disbelief, Leonardo quickly had him lie down to look up at the sculpture. Ludovico was astonished to discover that from this angle, the horse appeared to be enormous. Stunned, Ludovico immediately decided that everyone need fully support Leonardo to complete the project. However, a month later, Leonardo noticed something unusual. If the statue was enlarged 8 times, it would also amplify its flaws. He could not accept a his piece that was not perfect. Marco took him to a butcher's shop, where Leonardo could observe the internal structure of a horse. He immediately sketched the details and returned to proceed with the processing. Just as he was nearing completion, an incident occurred. The French army attacked the Milanese border, and Ludovico ordered all the bronze intended for the sculpture to be recalled for use as weapons. Seeing his passion being destroyed, Leonardo hurried to find Ludovico. However, at that moment, Ludovico's wife passed away due to complications during childbirth. While Ludovico was grieving, Leonardo suddenly appeared. In his anger, Ludovico shouted at Leonardo and decided to halt the sculpting work, wanting to find another way to commemorate his late wife. Ludovico commissioned Leonardo to paint a mural, which was also the famous painting of the Last Supper. At the same time, Caterina noticed Ludovico's young nephew. The nephew, not yet an adult, could only stay in his room every day. Seeing the boy alone and lonely, Caterina initiated to start a conversation. She inadvertently discovered that Ludovico was merely acting as a regent for his nephew, waiting for the boy to come of age to become the new master of the city. As Caterina intended to have a sip of wine, but Galeazzo stopped her. When she wanted to pour a new glass, Galeazzo made her spill the wine on the ground. Caterina sensed something was wrong. It seemed he was deliberately preventing her from drinking. Seizing the opportunity while Galeazzo was absent, she took a sip from the remaining wine, only to be denied died again. It appeared there was something wrong with the wine. As a result, that afternoon, an incident occurred. While the nephew was learning to paint, he suddenly fainted. Leonardo realized that he had been poisoned. Caterina also expressed her speculation, suggesting that they had done something. That evening, Leonardo intended to teach the boy, but he was informed that without Ludovico's permission, no one was allowed to enter. Leonardo sneaked into the next room and saw the doctor putting medicine into the water. After the doctor left, Leonardo rushed in, picked up the nephew, and tried to escape, but the boy was no longer breathing. Leonardo shouted for help, and by the time the doctor arrived, the nephew had already died. Caterina, upon learning of this, felt terrified. This palace was truly frightening. Ludovico would even kill his own kin for power. First, it was Ronaldo, and now it was his nephew. Maybe the next one was them. Caterina wanted to leave with Leonardo, but he refused. He did not want to start over. Here he had finally gained Ludovico's recognition. Furthermore, he had not yet completed the mural. If he left now, all his efforts would be in vain, and he would never achieve fame in his lifetime. Caterina sadly left the palace and returned to Florence to find a job. At that time, she was pregnant. Meanwhile, Leonardo continued working on his masterpiece. He went out into the streets to capture every images of people as models for his painting. He abandoned the traditional mural technique and adopted a new method, injecting paint into eggshells, which could keep the wall surface from peeling and cracking. He marked a point on the wall background. This was the gaze that had vanished. From this point, he could see the painting harmonizing with the room, as if sharing a dinner with Jesus. To create the mural, the first step was to separate the elements of the mural, sketching each character one by one. The second step was to puncture holes around the edges of the characters with nails. The third step was to fix the drawing onto the wall. The fourth step involved applying color with a brush, and finally he connected the dots together, revealing the overall image of the painting. Leonardo explained the context of this mural, depicting the evening when Jesus said that one of his disciples would betray him. Leonardo wanted to emphasize the expressions of the 7 disciples upon hearing those words. Everyone worked together to complete the painting. For this work, Leonardo had spent many sleepless nights, and even the smallest detail being wrong would anger him. Each time he finished a section, he would hold a candle close to inspect it, ensuring it was as perfect as possible. However, he still noticed a problem with the painting. If the figures in the painting stood up, they would hit the ceiling as it was too low. The workers insisted that it was just a painting. The figures in the painting would not stand up, and no one would think about such an angle. But Leonardo would not allow any flaws in his work. Ignoring the workers' warnings, he stubbornly decided to repaint it from the beginning. The others had no choice but to follow his lead. They divided the tasks. Some were responsible for mixing colors, others painted the background, and some focused on applying color. After a period of effort, the mural was nearing completion, but the incidents continued to occur. The French army attacked, killing one of Leonardo's workers. This was a warning to him. Anyone who supported Ludovico would have to die. Tommaso urged Leonardo to stop, saying their lives were in danger, but Leonardo remained determined to finish the work. Tommaso left in anger. 2 months later, the mural was completed, but the French army attacked the city, toppling the statue that Leonardo had previously created and declaring that Ludovico's time had come to an end. Leonardo lost his direction and returned to Florence. That day, someone asked him to paint a portrait. Although he initially intended to refuse, when he lifted the veil covering the woman's head, her gaze and her half-smile captivated him. The woman was none other than the famous Mona Lisa. Leonardo looked at Mona Lisa for a long time, but still couldn't paint her. Her daughter had just passed away, and she was still wearing mourning clothes, yet her lips bore a smile. To create a complete painting, he needed to see the true essence of the subject, but Leonardo did not see the soul within her. Mona Lisa suggested that perhaps Leonardo lacked love in his heart. At that moment, a messenger from Imola approached the mayor of Florence, presenting 2 options: pay a protection fee of 30 gold coins, or send Leonardo to the Imola palace as a designer. At that time, Leonardo was in a state of stagnation, so he decided to go to Imola. Duke Cesare of Imola asked Leonardo to look outside. Their water source lay outside the wall, and if the enemy attacked, they would lose their water supply. Therefore, Leonardo's first task was to improve the water flow. He observed the reality and sensed that water had emotions, sometimes angry, sometimes uncertain. He decided to harness the water's own energy for change. Leonardo dug a channel beside the riverbank, built a dam, and directed the water to flow beneath the walls, accompanying it with devices to support the flow. Cesare was extremely surprised. Unexpectedly, Leonardo quickly proposed a solution. The second task was more challenging: to rebuild the city walls from scratch and enhance the defensive devices. Before that, Leonardo needed to survey the city's terrain, but there were no tall towers there to provide a comprehensive view of the entire city. When Leonardo was at a loss, he looked up and saw birds flying in the sky. If he could also fly like them and take advantage of a high vantage point, it would be much simpler. Putting his words into action, Leonardo created a new type of cart. As the cart was pushed forward, a marble would drop, and by counting how many marbles fell, he could determine the length of the path. Leonardo with Marco explored every corner of the city, leaving no road untraveled, and eventually managed to draw a map of the city. Cesare was also astonished. It was the first time he had seen the entire city. Combined with Leonardo's defensive equipment, this structure would be indestructible. At midnight, Leonardo was threatened by an assassin who who forced him to meet Cesare. Cesare noticed the assassin's shadow on the wall and quickly subdued him. Leonardo was terrified. He only wanted to complete his masterpiece and did not wish to be caught up in political disputes. He begged Cesare to let him leave, but Cesare flatly refused. Under Leonardo's pleas, Cesare ordered him to design a weapon capable of defeating 100 enemies, promising to release him afterward. Leonardo worked through the night. He knew that once a weapon with such destructive power was created, it would lead to war. He just wanted to go home and not harm others. The next day, Cesare summoned Leonardo to witness an execution. Leonardo could not comprehend why Cesare would kill the most loyal soldier he had. Cesare explained that he wanted to instill fear in those who heard his name, ensuring that everyone would submit to him. As the executioner raised his hand and brought down the blade to end the soldier's life, Leonardo became even more determined to leave. He wrote a letter to Caterina, describing his circumstances. Caterina braved the rain to seek out Leonardo's father, pleading with him to save Leonardo. Despite their strained relationship, they were still family. However, Leonardo's father said nothing and told Caterina to return home. The next day, Caterina sought help from the mayor and saw Leonardo's father entering the building. She immediately understood that he was trying to save his son. Meanwhile, Leonardo designed a catapult that was 25 meters long, with 6 rotating wheels, capable of launching stones and explosives. Even if it was not placed on the battlefield, just hiding it in a corner would instill fear in everyone. Cesare decided to grant Leonardo his freedom. Besides the design, Leonardo's father brought a chest of gold coins to Cesare. Finally, Leonardo returned to Florence, but he still had not completed the painting of Mona Lisa. At that moment, an artist named Michelangelo emerged, showcasing his sculpture of David in the center of the city. People were amazed by the 5-meter-tall statue, but Leonardo did not like it at all. He didn't even attend the unveiling of the sculpture. In his eyes, the sculpture was a representation of the trash of idealism. His art did not express the truth. Caterina advised Leonardo not to bind himself to an unfinished work, but to go outside. Perhaps a change of scenery would alter his thoughts. Just then, the mayor invited Leonardo to paint a mural on the theme of war. Looking at the wall, Leonardo decided to create a large mural, but it had to be completed by the anniversary of the war. With time pressing, Leonardo advised Marco to buy materials. Marco happened to catch Caterina secretly meeting another man. Marco didn't have time to think much. He completed the task at hand first. Once the easel was ready, Leonardo climbed up to inspect it and discovered that the wall surface was too soft, necessitating a repaint. He applied a material mixed with wax to the wall before starting to paint. Indeed, the paint did not peel. During the day, Leonardo painted the wall, and by night, as the wall dried, he worked on his design. He looked at the entire wall, imagining the finished piece in his mind. At the same time, Michelangelo learned that Leonardo was painting a mural. The next day, the mayor brought Michelangelo into the room while Leonardo was working, and Michelangelo expressed his desire to paint another piece on the opposite wall. Leonardo immediately refused, stating that the noise would disrupt his work. However, the mayor was very excited, thinking it would be a competition between the two famous artists. Whoever painted better would be the winner of the city. As soon as Michelangelo arrived, he came with a sense of provocation. He deliberately painted a humorous image on the wall, causing everyone to laugh, clearly challenging Leonardo. Late at night, while Leonardo admired his mural, his father suddenly appeared. It had been many years since they last met. This time, his father did not scold him but instead praised his talent. Leonardo had long awaited these words and was deeply moved. Since he was 5 years old, he had been abandoned by his father, who had never cared for him. Although he had given birth to Leonardo, he had never loved him. Not knowing what else to say, his father turned and left. A few days later, Leonardo received the news that his father had passed away. A person who grew up lacking love spent his whole life searching for it. It was a pity that by the time Leonardo gained fame, his father was no longer around. He returned to the church to look at his work, acknowledging Michelangelo's talent. Leonardo stated that he accepted this job to show everyone that he was the most talented artist. Michelangelo smiled. As a child, he had looked up to Leonardo as a role model and always wanted to be like him. However, when he heard that his idol did not appreciate his work, Michelangelo intentionally painted on the opposite wall to make everyone look down on Leonardo. Leonardo removed the draft of his painting, as it no longer held any meaning for him. Michelangelo advised Leonardo that if he left now, everyone would think he could not bear to lose and was walking away. But Leonardo no longer cared. The next day, he went to find the mayor to withdraw from the project. Then, to learn that Michelangelo had also left, the rivalry between the two artists came to an end. Leonardo poured all his energy into completing the painting of the Mona Lisa. At that time, Marco told him that after Caterina left Milan, she had given birth to a baby boy, also had sent him to the job bank. Leonardo did not want the child to be abandoned like he had been, so he decided to take the baby in. Just then, Galeazzo arrived, wanting to use Leonardo to persuade the mayor to help Ludovico regain power. Caterina's son heard the commotion and came downstairs. Galeazzo learned that the child was already 10 years old and immediately had an idea. He returned to report to Duke Ludovico, telling him that Leonardo was unwilling to help and suggesting that Ludovico might have an illegitimate child. Ludovico thought that if the French found out he had an illegitimate child, they would surely take the boy away, which would jeopardize his chances of regaining power. So he acted first first, ordering Galeazzo to capture the child. In the middle of the night, when Leonardo heard noises outside, he advised the boy to hide. The soldiers believed they were kidnapping children. Without Leonardo's consent, they had gone to search. They stormed up to the second floor, leaving no corner unchecked. The soldiers, seeing Caterina's worried expression, pulled back the curtains and tossed everything outside. Caterina anxiously watched as the child, hiding in a corner, blew out the candle. When the soldiers failed to find anything, they left. After they were gone, the boy came out. Hiding like this was not a viable solution. Leonardo temporarily took the child to the pastor and destroyed all works related to Caterina. Then, Leonardo personally caused her death, seeing her die without helping. Galeazzo witnessed everything. Leonardo was arrested for murder, with all the charges pointing to him. Today was the day he was to be executed. Throughout it all, Leonardo did not explain himself, allowing the noose to be placed around his neck. At that moment, the judge responsible for Leonardo's case arrived just in time, stating that the letter in his hand could prove Leonardo's innocence. The letter revealed that Galeazzo had acted on Ludovico's orders to kill his own nephew. The judge declared that Galeazzo was the true murderer. To prevent Caterina from revealing the letter, Galeazzo had killed her. When Galeazzo realized everything was uncovered, he attacked the soldiers and fled. However, the letter contained nothing of substance. The judge discovered the truth. Leonardo had acted to protect the child, believing that for the child to be safe, Caterina had to die so that no one would find the boy. Thus, Leonardo destroyed all the paintings related to Caterina to make it appear that they had a conflict that led to her death. In reality, Leonardo had poisoned Caterina, but after Galeazzo left, he immediately gave her the antidote and used another corpse to replace hers. The situation seemed to unfold smoothly until Leonardo noticed that a painting had gone missing. To prevent the situation from being discovered, he stayed behind to search for that painting. The judge always wanted to know why Leonardo had killed Caterina, but overlooked the obvious truth. Leonardo had not committed murder. Ultimately, Caterina took her son and left, while Leonardo spent the rest of his life completing the magnificent work of the Mona Lisa. Above is the entire content of the movie. Thank you everyone for watching, goodbye, and see you again in the next videos. Bye bye.